I have finished another book. This is Fly Fishing with Leonardo da Vinci. It's by a Tea Press author, David Ladensohn. He actually was a guest on Tripod. He was one of our first guests. He was interviewed with Tom Payton, who used to be my co-host, but I would love the opportunity to interview him again now that I've finished reading his book. It was a really great read. It's not something I would normally pick up. I don't usually gravitate towards nonfiction. I love fantasy. I love mysteries, horror, like general fiction. I'm not one to usually gravitate towards nonfiction, which is ironic given the fact that the Trinity University Press is an independent publisher of majority nonfiction. We have a few poetry anthologies and some other, we have some children's books, art books mixed in there, but majority nonfiction. However, it's given me the great opportunity to get exposed to awesome authors like David Ladensohn and learn more about nonfiction. So, getting into the book, which is what we're here to do, discussing fly fishing with Leonardo da Vinci. The general overview is that David, the author, is an avid fly fisherman. He loves fly fishing. He's gone on tons of adventures for it. And he also is really interested by Leonardo da Vinci, the historic engineer, painter, pretty well-known guy. He's pretty much up there with like Shakespeare as being like one of those iconic people who there's so many questions about him, so much we still don't know, but so much of his work is still so highly acclaimed. It's viewed all over the world. So he has these two loves, fly fishing and Leonardo da Vinci. And he's starting to realize that Leonardo da Vinci would be an amazing fly fishing guide, particularly because he is a master of observation. He studied water and water currents and how the water works for engineering projects as well as putting it into his artwork. He was one of the first people to paint a figure when in water and adjust the water, like the view from beneath the water, because that reflection places the image in a different place. He was one of the first painters to accurately capture that because he had so closely observed objects being met with water, how currents change, where different currents form. And as Leidenson goes to discuss, that observation and that innate knowledge of how the water works is super critical to being a great fly fisherman because where the slower currents and faster currents meet are where the fish like to hang out because the food is brought to them. They don't have to do much work. They're just sitting there. And that's where the fly fisherman wants to place their bait. That's how they're going to catch fish. So he argues that he would be a great guide for his power of observation and that he's also a comedic kind of guy. He's performed for several noblemen. He was often brought in to play instruments, be a comic. He's somebody who would be really entertaining to go on these long hikes, long travels with to get to those hidden fly fishing spots that are so coveted in that circle. So that's the first part of the argument. That's kind of the surface level take of the book. So David kind of covers a bit about Leonardo da Vinci, his history, his work, his relationship to water and currents. And then he also discusses a bit of his personal life and where he's gone fly fishing and how he got into it and some of the intricate pieces of that sport. The first thing I notice right off the bat to kind of get into my evaluation of this book is there is so much of the author in this book, which is something I love. Especially after having met with him and talked with him, I felt like I was having a face-to-face conversation with him about his passion the whole time, which, as so many people can argue, that's such a lovely experience to get to talk to somebody about their dreams, their passions. It just lights a person up and often brings some of the best conversations around. So, having met him and then gotten to read his book, like, oh my God, he's talking right to me. So from the very beginning, his voice just comes off as so authentic and really humble. He's immediately open about how he doesn't have a background necessarily as a researcher. He even talks about having gone to taxi driver school, but that still somehow relates to the study, right? Everything's kind of led up to his study of this. And he has many moments where he shows the reader the very unknown side of being a more amateur or novice researcher, of having to send requests to these renowned schools, databases, archives, and requesting information about Leonardo da Vinci, requesting to see his original drawings, his original sketches. Those are well protected documents that require access. And he had to request it. He got denied. And he was very open about the information he had access to and what he is theorizing or the guesses he's making, the conclusions he's drawing just out of his own his own interests, his own biases about wanting Leonardo to be this amazing guide, this amazing fly fisherman. So he's very open and honest about that. And I think it provides such an interesting take of reading a nonfiction book by a researcher whose whole profession is not being a researcher. I think that makes it all the more accessible. It makes me think, oh, I could go and research and do a project like this about one of my interests that maybe other people haven't covered. When you see that gap in the knowledge and you just want to go out there and fill that gap with your own research and doing it the way you want to and learning everything that you can about a subject. I really enjoyed that piece. In addition to that honesty and that authenticity, he also has so much humor throughout this book, which I was not expecting. A nonfiction book about fly fishing and Leonardo da Vinci, I didn't expect humor, but I got a lot of it. The section headers of this book, which something I really enjoy about a nonfiction book is when the sections are short, because books like this are so information heavy. So having smaller sections just helps you move through the book. An awesome section header. This one, trout are couch potatoes. I love these section headers. Every time I would finish a section, I'd get to a new one and I would chuckle. One of the my favorite ones is who's the lucky bastard now? I thought that was it just immediately got my interest. I wanted to know more about what he was talking about. And I think those kinds of hooks not only show his humor, but his awareness of the audience, knowing that not everybody is intrigued in art history and engineering or fly fishing to appeal to the general reader like myself, who's not even a general nonfiction reader. Those section headers alone, like, kept me moving easily through this book. I always wanted to see what creative title would be next. And there's also just so many awesome visual aids, original drawings. This is like a picture of a tackle box for a fly fisherman, which is something both of which I have never seen, and just so many great sketches just to give reference to because he'll discuss a particular observation that Leo made, but it's hard to picture it a lot of the time. So he offers those visual aids, which was another huge part of this book. And his passion over these drawings is just apparent across it. In addition, he also makes a lot of parenthetical asides. Like he'll make some joke about it or about something somebody said, and he'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know that." And it's just his little humor, his personality poking through as the author. And it just made me innately trust what he was telling me, the information he was providing, but also putting so much emotion and connection into reading his book because I wanted to learn about his passion. I wanted to learn about what he discovered because of that humor and that human connection I was making. So he did an excellent job on that. So if you're looking for a nonfiction book that will keep you hooked as a not necessarily a nonfiction reader, this is a great pick because he keeps you engaged through his voice as an author. In addition to that, the next thing that I really appreciated was the pacing. This book starts out with a great mix of information on Leonardo's childhood. However, it's not like a textbook where I'm reading 50 pages about every single detail from when Leonardo was born to when he was 13, blah, blah, blah. Some of that is because we don't have all that information, of course. He's a historic figure. There's much we don't know about him. But it's also, again, I think David's awareness of his reader and understanding that not everybody has the attention span and the mental capacity, especially younger readers, to hold on for 50 pages about Leonardo's childhood. And it's not, he knows it's not the most important point that he's getting across. So he moves on. But you get what you need to know. And I think that's such great awareness. And it's the pacing is so great. You go right through the childhood, and then he'll throw in a mix of something about fly fishing, his first fly fishing trip, or something he learned about casting or having an issue with catching fish, and things like that, which really helps break up the history and informative side of things with the personal anecdotes that just keep, again, keep you moving. I think so many nonfiction books lack that awareness or that flow, and you just get stuck learning too much about one thing and your brain just needs a break. This book, with combined with the section headers and those parenthetical side notes, all of that just keeps the flow going. You're all of a sudden halfway through this book and you don't even remember how long you've been reading. It's great. I think that's majority of what I had to say about the pacing. I just like that mix. That was really important to me because that's something that often makes me put down a nonfiction book. To circle back a bit to the visuals and the drawings, in addition to the drawings that are actually from Leonardo, which is so cool to see. It just is an absolute flashback into history, which is awesome. It is really important because so much of it is hard to visualize. And there's also his poetry in there and his writing. which I found so interesting because I love writing and I would love to be a writer in the future, a published author. So to see somebody just in their notebook jotting down poems and riddles was really fun. It made reading it enjoyable and it gave me the same connection that David has of having this unbridled love of learning and wanting to learn more about something they're interested in. And it kind of gave me a sort of glimpse of that feeling of, oh, I want to read a riddle. Like, that's fun. But I'm also learning about Leonardo da Vinci and who he was. So I thought not only did those visuals help me see so much, but it also gave me that connection to the author and Leonardo. And just there was the poems, there was his artwork, which is always, I mean, that'll always get your attention in the book. And it gives you that same fulfillment of, oh, I got the end of the chapter and there's a picture at the end. Oh, like I'm moving quickly through this book. So again, that awareness of pacing is incredible. There was also a very small aside that I wanted to make that I think David does an excellent job of bringing in the feminist, not necessarily feminist, but a feminine history into this book. Rather than using his, him, he general pronoun, he uses her. So like his or her guide, he'll just choose her. And I thought that was such a subtle but great touch because I think a lot of nonfiction writers, when they're discussing history, they just resort to that he, him pronoun because that's what's in every textbook. But I think David was really conscious of the fact that her is just as useful as a general pronoun and made that decision. And that's obviously a conscious choice. So I really appreciated that as a female reader, reading about a particular sport and history that's very male dominated. And he also includes a really great section about this nun, Dame, I think it's Julianne or Juliana, and she was fly fishing. Like she went fishing, and there's documented things about that. And she also talks about the etiquette of fishing and not stealing from other people and how to not overfish certain spots for the sake of conservancy. He also talks about how Cleopatra was like would fish just casually, not to catch food, but just because she was doing it, and how that was like part of her allure to Mark Antony. So he's talking about these intellectual, powerful women and bringing them in as examples, which I think is amazing because it's so easy to make this book entirely about the male side of fly fishing and history and the Renaissance, when in reality, there's so many female figures that also were apparent and prominent across the history of the story. So I think he just shows that women have always had a place in this sport and in this history. And I think that was a really great inclusion. Going back to how so much of him comes through, he clearly loves talking about his wife and has such an appreciation for her. He includes her in the history of discovering Leonardo and the trips they went on and going to Italy. And that inclusion as well is just, it was great to see, especially because David isn't an author in my generation. He's an older author. And to be, have that cognizance, have that awareness that bringing representation into this particular sport and this part of history is really important. So I really wanted to make that note because I that was really surprised me and it really endeared me to the author and the story. And I wanted to expand on a main component of the story, being that Leonardo is a master of observation because not only was he spending hours watching currents and watching the way water change direction around objects and how different objects alter the course of water, he was also studying body language and watching people so closely, and all of that would transfer into his artwork. That's what made it so spectacular. It was so accurate, so realistic beyond any other artist because he was the master of observation in so many ways. I think that argument is so sound within this book. And it also taught me a lot about the power of observation in an individual's life, in anyone's life. David talks about it from the perspective of fly fishing and how being patient, being calm, observing your surroundings, taking in your environment to catch fish, but also the peace and the serenity that brings you by not being distracted by so many overwhelming factors, but only focusing on your environment and the world around you. That's a very novel, or it's a very rare experience in our day-to-day lives now because there is so much stimulation everywhere. So being in a scenario where you can just sit and take in your environment for a purpose, where you're motivated to do that, was really interesting to me. I'm not one to want to go fishing necessarily, but it made me consider where I find that in other times in my life. I'm a horseback rider myself. I play polo, and I was thinking about my closest times to peace and serenity are definitely when I'm at the barn. I don't have my phone, I don't have my screens, I don't have anything but the horse I'm working with and communicating with that animal, which takes a lot of awareness about how I'm feeling, how the horse is feeling, what I'm doing, how I'm going to hit the ball, all of those things. And I think a lot of people have that experience when practicing or playing sports as well. If you're a cyclist or a runner, you are solely focused on that task. You are thinking about your body. You are trying to even maybe distract your mind with the environment around you, all of those things. So I thought about that. I also thought about writing in of itself. Although writing can be used as an escape or a distraction, it's also a great way to note your environment and note your observations about your body, your feelings, and what's going on around you. It just kind of emphasized how the power of observation can not only help you find rewards, like fishing and catching fish, but also the internal physical, mental reward of peace, calmness, open mind. Creativity often blossoms out of this as well, considering how many of Leonardo's excellent artworks and engineering projects were generated through hours of observation and just taking in the world around him and seeing what could be changed, what could be altered, how we can harness nature into our science and into our creative works, all of that coming together just due to simply sitting and observing something and trying to understand it. I think a lot of our answers are given to us very easily now, which makes advancing and creating so accessible, but it also takes away that journey and that process of putting pieces together in our mind by simply sitting back and taking in the world around us. So that was a really positive takeaway that I came away with from the broader message of the book and the broader argument that Leonardo is a master of observation. And if you look at any of his drawings, any of his artwork, it's clear that he's spent so much time studying people, studying nature, and studying the world, and had just a love for learning more about it through observation. Beyond those few points about like the feminine take, the visuals, the pacing and process, and the author's voice, I was left with a few random thoughts and feelings as we were talking about with observation. I had some observations about the book. One of which being this book constantly pushed me to use my imagination. I was asked by the author multiple times to imagine a scenario, picture a scenario where Leonardo is running towards a river as a child. Those are images and stories that history hasn't really put into color. It's very different reading that in a textbook and trying to just read the notes on this happened on this day versus being told to imagine something. And I think fantasy and fiction make that really easy. The world is so rich. But with nonfiction, you have to really buy into the story, buy into the characters. And I think by asking the reader to imagine and picture things, it was really a great way to create a vivid fictional world around real nonfiction context. That was an experience I haven't really had before, other than reading creative nonfiction essays where there's some element of a first person story being told in tandem with facts and information. So it was something I didn't expect out of this book and something I really enjoyed. And I think any other reader would as well. One who maybe doesn't pick up fiction because of that lack of a fictional world that you're getting engrossed in. But with how many times I was asked to picture an artwork or picture trying to fly and thinking about how to do that and learning about the human body as one of the first, pioneers of doing autopsies, that was such an interesting exercise and it really helped me be more creative because it just asked me to flex that muscle in my brain that we don't always get to do. And another observation that came to me was so much of this book is about water, obviously. And in a lot of other things I've been reading, this metaphor, this symbol keeps coming back to me of water is both the bearer of life and death. And that's definitely explored a bit in this book. So if that's a dichotomy and a metaphor that's interesting to you, you'll probably really enjoy this book as well, because he talks about how studying water and being around water gives both David and Leo so much life, so much passion, so much zest for knowledge and things like that. So that's a bearer of life in a way, but Leonardo also experienced this devastating flood to his childhood home and neighborhood and area. And David theorizes that possibly undergoing that trauma as a child and experiencing the grief of losing so many people through a flood might have also brought him to want to better understand water. So that interesting mix of water bringing life, but also bringing destruction and death was really interesting to explore. And he also brought up, because Leonardo studied the internal organs, nervous system, everything like that. He also talked about how Leonardo was able to branch together how the heart functions in the same way that water does, going from low pressure to high pressure and things like that, literally being the life source, and also when it's no longer functional, the source of loss. That was such a beautiful metaphor and an artistic and creative metaphor that I, once again, completely surprised to come out of this book. So there's kind of just great inclusions around every corner on this book. And on the lighter side of observations, and something I wanted to share, is in this book I learned that there's a freshwater fishing hall of fame. So if that intrigues you, definitely research it. It's pretty interesting. And the last thing I wanted to share and maybe spend some time on, well, the last thing I wanted to share my observations and spend some time on was the idea throughout this book of people combining their passions with their work, with their interests to create. For example, with David Ladensohn, he combined his passion for learning about Leonardo da Vinci and his fun interest of fishing to make a book, to make art, to make something to share with other people. Similarly, with Leonardo, observing water, studying water, with his love of knowledge and observation turned into art, turned into literal paintings and works of art that are still renowned across the world. And it made me ask what I do myself in my life, where I'm combining my passions and an interest to create something new. And I was like, well, with this, I guess if you consider video essays, videography, an art form, it's like I'm combining my love of reading, my love of writing, because I write these notes down, these scripts down, and it turns into an awesome video. Hopefully, awesome video. And other things of like, I do a lot of junk journaling and just having like a love for collecting things, a love for making art and turning it into an artwork. I think everybody has something like that. And if you don't, I think that's often where people are led astray and kind of have these crises that they're not in the right career or line of work and things like that. Even on the broader sense, I also work for a polo related company, and getting to combine my love for horses and riding and my love for writing and video and content making into a job, that's the best combination you can seek out. And I think reading David's book really showed me that, because he is an author. He wrote a book, but that book was generated from a love and a passion that he had. And that's why his, when he was met with those denials from, requesting research, requesting information in the drawings from Leonardo, he didn't stop writing this book. He didn't stop wanting to be an author to tell this story. He just went about it a different way. And that was such a great lesson to take away from this. And I don't know if a lot of nonfiction does that because it's not always written from this amateur research perspective. And many nonfiction writers aren't necessarily doing what David's doing, where they're combining a passion into making a book. Sometimes it's, if they're working for a university or an institution, they're kind of told to write a certain paper, write a certain project. Or for some, I know it's making money. What topic is the most interesting right now? And those things can turn into passions, absolutely. But I think doing it the other way around, where you're coming from a passion into creating something new, tends to be the most satisfying and fruitful for both the person viewing, reading, enjoying the art, and the person making it. So that was another interesting aside. And then I was left with a few questions, which maybe somebody can answer, or something I'll have to ask David another time. But at the end of the sections in the book, let me pull one up. There are these little birds at the end of every section. And I don't know if there's fly fishermen out there who can tell me if maybe it's like a water bird or a bird that eats fish or something like that. But there's one at the end of every section, and that might be something I should ask David because, well, what are the little birds for? That was a really shallow question, but it still intrigued me. Another bigger question was, I wonder if Leonardo felt any sort of imposter syndrome when he was creating, because a theme that's explored a lot in the book is Leonardo was kind of known as an abandoner of projects. He would be commissioned to do an artwork or a engineering project, and he just wouldn't finish it multiple times. This is like very well documented that he would just do this, even though he would, he needed money. Like he needed the money. He liked doing the work. You can see the drafts of him making it, but he just never finishes the commission. And I was wondering if he maybe felt like some level of imposter syndrome coming up in like Milan and Florence, surrounded by incredible artists, all getting more commissions than you, more money, more recognition. I wonder if he somehow felt like he wasn't able to compete, if he wasn't good enough. I don't know if that was a thought that crossed his mind in that era, but I was kind of curious about that because I think a lot of modern artists feel that way now of like, oh, there's this or that person I'm competing with, and I don't know if I'm qualified. But that was just something I wanted to throw out there to see if maybe there was anything he had journaled about or wrote about experiencing with that, because I could definitely understand that being something he experienced. An additional question was, I wonder if David Ladensohn, the author of the book, sees any similarities between himself and Leonardo, and if he thinks they would be friends. I think I did ask him, or Tom Hayton asked David something like this in our tripod episode. I think we asked if, they would be friends, if he thinks they would have a good relationship. And I think David answered saying he likes to think that they would, but he's unsure. I don't want to be misquoting him, but I think David and everyone would maybe be a little bit intimidated to see if I could keep up with the level of intelligence and observation that Leonardo just does so innately. So I wonder if maybe David thought that. I'll have to go back and look at the episode again. But they have this shared, unbridled love and joy for learning and observing and being in nature. So I feel like they have so many similarities. And I would love, that question of like, if you could have dinner with anybody from like, history of the past. I know David, the answer would be Leonardo da Vinci. And I would do anything to record that as a podcast. So anyway, that was another question. And then I kind of wanted to leave it on this last question or theory consideration, going back to how Leo had so many unfinished projects, the debate of perfectionism versus procrastination. It's clear that Leonardo would make multiple drafts of artwork to have the most perfect finished piece. And as we've seen in his work that's out there in the world, it is perfection. There's not things you would change. It's beautiful, it's perfect. He's clearly studied every element of this. But I wonder if that burden of wanting it to be perfect was what made him procrastinate so much and be so late on so many commissions or not finish them at all. If that burden of wanting it to be perfect, or if it was something else, sort of that imposter syndrome idea, or just being bored or being uninspired, being intimidated, spending too much time observing other things. I was kind of curious about that. And I was kind of wanting to consider it for myself and other people I know, because I wouldn't consider myself a perfectionist in any way. I mean, I'm live recording this video and I'll do some edits on it, but I don't have a script. I'm just talking about this as it comes to me. So I wouldn't consider that perfectionism. However, I do procrastinate because I want to make sure I read the book very closely and take all these notes and blah, blah, blah. I probably could have made this video weeks ago. I'd finished this book a while ago, but I wanted to do it justice. So is that procrastination or is that perfectionism? And I don't know if that's really up to anybody but ourselves to judge. And it reminded me to be giving myself a little more grace in that area of when I'm overthinking and when I'm trying to be a perfectionist and make everything awesome. I'm still human. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to observe myself and figure out how I feel about my projects and things like that. So it's important to just give yourself that grace. Don't call it procrastination, call it perfectionism. I think the procrastination side of things might put that negative spin on it, but if you're looking at it in the sense that you just want something to turn out really well, I think that's fair and you need to give yourself some grace with that. However, don't let yourself not create and observe and enjoy your environment and your life because you are so concerned with perfection. We're never going to make something completely perfect. Even Leonardo, with his incredible artworks that have lasted lifetimes, he probably still has another draft of that sitting somewhere in a forgotten drawer or thrown out or whatever that he thought was even better. He probably would keep drafting those artworks over and over again, and maybe that's the feeling that kept him from finishing work. He just never thought it was going to be how perfect it was in his mind. Or if he observed it long enough, he would see something else he has to do, something else he has to add. So I think at a certain point, we just have to be excited about making something, be really happy about how something's turned out, and have that feeling be the perfection we're looking for. Otherwise, we're just going to keep circling over the same thing and probably getting a worse result than we had in that original moment. We might have something to critique, but in that moment you were happy and you made something, and that's what should really matter. So I wonder how many drafts David made of this book. I should maybe ask him that. But I like to think that he probably was so driven by his love for this and his passion for these subjects that he just wanted to send those drafts out as soon as they were ready because he wanted to share that with people. And I think that central feeling is what I want to leave you all with, debating perfectionism versus procrastination and how observation can help bridge the gap between those things. So that's all. Thank you.